Christmas Eve. They expected a toast. I gave them silence and the weight of my chair scraping against marble as I walked away. The dining room had never looked warmer. Soft jazz floated under the chandeliers. Garland twisted down the handrails. Wine glasses sparkled beside gold-rimmed plates. Everything was perfect, at least on the surface. The smell of roasted duck and cinnamon only served to mask something colder in the air. I stood at the edge of the table, clutching the rolled blueprint I'd wrapped in ribbon. It wasn't much, just a detailed rendering of the renovations I'd overseen the past decade. Each archway, each reclaimed beam, even the wine cellar's waterproofing system. This house was my life's work, my legacy. I had planned to raise a glass and present it to Jason, not as an inheritance, but as a tribute to continuity to family. But I was late to my own revelation, and they had already rehearsed a different ending. Jason stood across from me, sharply dressed eyes bright with anticipation, but not for the gift I held. Madeline rested her hand on his arm. Her smile was tight, rehearsed. "I'd like to make an announcement," Jason said, raising his glass. I lowered mine. He didn't even glance at me. "After a long discussion, the family has decided it's time for a transition. Starting next quarter, Madeline and I will be managing the house. Dad will move to a new apartment we've arranged on the west side, closer to the city." I didn't flinch. There were murmurs. Someone coughed. The clink of a spoon against a plate sounded too loud. I looked around the table. My cousins, my late wife's sister, a few business acquaintances, none of whom dared meet my eyes. Except Madeline, who now squeezed Jason's hand in quiet triumph. I placed my gift gently on the table and untied the ribbon. The blueprint unraveled with a soft hiss across the linen. Their eyes flicked toward it, then away, as if it embarrassed them. "This is a map," I said, "of everything I rebuilt. After the fire, after your mother passed." Jason remained still. "We know Dad, and we're grateful." Gratitude. That word again. It sounded like a retirement plaque. I rolled the map back up slower this time. The room fell into a hush. "If this is the family's decision," I said quietly, "then I'll leave this table." I stood. The only sound was my chair scraping against the marble. No one moved. Not even Jason. His jaw tightened, but he stayed frozen. As did the entire room. I walked the length of the table, past polished crystal and untouched dessert. I passed my cousin Meredith, who tried to speak but closed her mouth before sound emerged. The silence was too sharp, too final. Every step echoed. At the doorway I paused. My reflection stared back from the hallway mirror, shoulders straight, lips tight. I didn't look like a man defeated. I looked like a man who had just remembered who he was. Behind me I heard a whisper. Madeline turned to Jason and whispered, "Are you sure he won't sue?" Jason squeezed his hand. He has nothing left to fight back. But Walter had stopped at the door, smiling coldly. I taught Jason to measure twice, cut once. Shame he never learned the part about what you can't cut history. 2 days after Christmas, the festive warmth had thinned into a brittle cold. The snow on the sidewalk no longer looked pristine. I sat across from Henry Brooke in his narrow-paneled office, above a bakery that had been closed for years. The faint smell of cinnamon still lingered in the vents, blending oddly with the scent of old paper and brass. Henry had always been meticulous, the type of man who filed documents in triplicate and believed margin of error was a phrase invented by lazy men. He once helped me draft my will back when Jason still looked me in the eye when saying thank you. He pulled out a folder labeled Shaw W. "You're sure this isn't a misunderstanding?" he asked. "Open it." Inside was a record clean, official looking of a transfer of ownership. The property had been reassigned to Jason and Madeline via a temporary power of attorney, dated 6 months ago. I recognized the signature. Mine. Slanted, a bit shaky. "That was when you were in the hospital," Henry said, frowning. "They said I was signing insurance renewals." Henry exhaled through his nose, slow and heavy. "It holds up, barely. The power of attorney gave him authority over assets for 60 days. He filed this on day 59. I didn't speak. Not right away. Jason hadn't just moved fast. He'd moved when I couldn't run. "I need to trace ownership back to the renovations," I said. "Any original contracts, blueprints, expense reports, supplier agreements?" Henry nodded. "You kept hard copies," I thought for a moment. "Calvin Reese. Still in Chicago, hasn't moved since '96. I left Henry's office as the streetlights flickered on. The drive to Calvin's neighborhood was familiar, tree-lined blocks of aging craftsman homes, sidewalks cracked by time and roots. Calvin had been more than a subcontractor. He was a neighbor, a friend, one of the few people who knew every inch of that house structurally and emotionally. He opened the door in a grease-stained flannel and blinked in surprise. "Walter, damn. Thought you were a ghost. I need a file." He raised an eyebrow. "Come in." Calvin's study smelled like old coffee and engine oil. He dug through a filing cabinet and returned with a yellow folder marked in faded Sharpie Shaw renovation, 2012-2015. "I thought you might ask for this someday." Inside were contractor agreements, permits, itemized material orders, and at the very top a signed declaration that I was the sole investor and proprietor throughout the process. It was my name in ink. No cosigners. No ambiguity. I looked up at him. Did Jason ever come asking for these? Calvin scratched the back of his head. "Last summer. Showed up out of nowhere. Asked if I still had the documents." "What did he say?" "Said it was a compliance thing. Needed to clean old files for tax reasons. Asked if I'd destroy redundant papers." My grip on the folder tightened. "I told him no," Calvin added. "I said history isn't redundant." I held up the signed contract. "History cannot be erased when there are witnesses." There was a long pause between us. Then Calvin spoke again. "Walter, there's someone else." I looked up. His expression had shifted, careful, even wary. "Someone who knew about the property's tax exemption. It was unique. You only got it because of how you rebuilt after the fire." I narrowed my eyes. "Who?" He hesitated, then said, "Sophie, the ex-wife of someone who never forgot you. They moved like sharks, sensing weakness. I moved like current beneath the ice." On the morning of December 27th, the city had returned to its usual rhythm. The decorations still clung to street lamps, but people had resumed their hurried steps and half-finished coffees. I wasn't in a rush. Strategy didn't require speed. It required silence. The notary office sat between a dry cleaner and a florist that hadn't opened in years. Inside, it smelled of ink and plastic binders. The woman behind the counter flipped through the renovation contract Calvin had given me. "This document is clean," she said at last. "No co-owners, no encumbrances." I nodded. "Now compare it to the latest filing under the Shaw estate." She tapped at her terminal. "Well, it says the property belongs to Jason Shaw, but the power of attorney used for that transfer expired weeks before this filing." Her eyes met mine. "This won't hold up if challenged. I intend to challenge." I left with stamped copies and walked 2 blocks south to the land office. It was quiet there too, just the steady drone of fluorescent lights and the occasional hum of a printer. I filed a formal request to revalidate ownership based on the original renovation contract. The clerk didn't ask questions. She simply took the documents, stamped them, and gave me a receipt. That was enough for now. Next stop, the community council. They had once granted me a unique tax exemption decades ago after I rebuilt the house post-fire using sustainable materials and heritage wood. Jason never lived through that ordeal, never paid attention to how exemptions could stick to a title like ivy to stone. I composed a letter at the back corner of a public library, printed it, and sent it with a stamped contract. A clean, dry sentence ended the second paragraph. "I respectfully request confirmation that the original tax-exempt status has not been legally voided." 2 down. I made my way to an old coffee shop I hadn't visited in years. It was where I used to draft construction notes, client proposals, even parts of my retirement plan. The barista didn't recognize me. That felt right. I opened my notebook and began checking the boxes. Original contract. Tax exemption confirmation, Sophie. Bank, Turnabroworm, Berserketing, waiting for response. Which brought me to the next move. Jason had tried to convert the house into leverage, specifically collateral, for a seed round of his fintech startup. It was all there in the public registry of secured interests. The house was tied to Darlins & Co. with a lien noted just last month. I drafted a letter. No emotion, no accusations, just clarity. To whom it may concern, it has come to my attention that collateral referenced in loan agreement, number 90382, may not qualify as legally owned by the borrower. Please find attached documents showing sole ownership and investor status belonging to Walter Shaw. I printed it, signed it, and faxed it. No return address, no further comment. It was the first warning shot. Even sharks hesitate when they smell blood from their own kind. That evening, I sat again in the coffee shop, this time near the window. People passed by outside umbrellas, slicing the windcoats pulled tight. I sipped black coffee and reviewed my notes. Jason hadn't noticed yet. He would. But by then, the ground beneath his empire would already be shifting. I opened the notebook, struck a line through the first point, and added a check mark. Original contract. Tax exemption confirmation, Sophie. Bank commerce waiting for response. Then my phone buzzed. Email notification from Darlings and Commerce Bank. Subject clarification needed. Collateral issue body. We need to clarify some points about the legality of the collateral in loan agreement 90382. Jason built his empire on my name. Now he'll watch it sink by the very hands that raised him. On the morning of December 29th, the documents arrived by courier. Sophie hadn't signed the envelope. She didn't need to. The seal on the county archive told me everything I needed to know. Inside was the tax exemption certificate, clear as glass. The property had been declared a single-owner residential asset of historic and ecological significance. That classification meant one thing in legal terms: it could not be used as commercial collateral without the original owner's consent. Jason never had mine. I took the documents to Henry's office. He read through them, slowly nodding. Then he pulled up a draft he'd prepared the night before, a formal request for temporary asset freeze, citing fraud and misuse of power of attorney. "This won't grant us victory," he said as he signed, "but it will stop the game clock." "That's all I need," I replied. By noon, the motion had been filed. Copies sent to the civil court county registrar, and by priority faxed to Darlings and Commerce Bank. I didn't call Jason. I didn't have to. The tremor was already rippling. That evening, Jason held an investor meeting at Bellari's, one of those modern steakhouses where men drank like titans and smiled like politicians. I wasn't there, but I knew the exact moment Thomas York, lead angel investor, received my message. He was halfway through his grilled branzino when his assistant slid a tablet across the table. On the screen, scanned copies of the exemption document, the freeze motion, and a note in my handwriting. "I believe it's unwise to invest in foundations built on sand." Jason's smile froze mid-sentence. He excused himself under the pretense of a market alert. In the corridor, his phone rang. "Darlings and Co. or Mr. Shaw, we've received notice of an asset dispute regarding the collateral in your loan agreement." Jason tightened his grip on the phone. "Dispute from who we are, obliged not to disclose the party until court review. However, the contract is now under suspension pending investigation. Additional disbursements are halted." The call ended. Jason stared at the wallpaper as if it had betrayed him. Back in the dining room, Thomas York was already checking the exit. At 9:34 p.m., Jason stood in his office alone. The city lights blurred behind glass, and his once-polished shoes tapped erratically on the hardwood. He threw a wine glass at the corner bookshelf. The sound of shattering was quick, sharp, followed by his voice cracking, like it hadn't since youth. "He's playing dirty," Madeline had entered quietly. She didn't flinch at the broken glass, only watched. For the first time, she saw the man she married not as ambitious, but as fragile, exposed. "He's playing dirty," Jason said again, quieter. "He's turning everything against me." Madeline didn't respond. At 10:12 p.m., Henry's message arrived on my phone. "The court has approved an emergency investigation. The house is temporarily frozen for transfer." I typed slowly. "My turn has begun. They took everything but left behind their footprints. Now I trace them to the edge of their own undoing." December 30th. A crisp winter wind danced between steel towers and mirrored glass, but inside the Grandview Convention Hall, all was bright and glossy. Jason Shaw stood beneath a constellation of LED lights flanked by banners of his company's logo and buzzwords about innovation, legacy, and vision. Cameras clicked. Journalists leaned forward. Investors lined the front row. Jason adjusted his cufflinks and smiled into the spotlight, but his voice carried a hairline fracture. "This new platform," he began, "will transform how we manage decentralized capital, bringing trust back to financial intelligence." He had rehearsed the pitch 100 times, but confidence can't cover cracks in the foundation. Midway through his speech, a hand shot up in the second row. The badge on the journalist's coat read, "Chicago Post." What is your response, Mr. Shaw, the journalist asked, to the county court's decision freezing your collateral asset? Specifically, the allegation that the property used to secure your latest loan was never legally in your name. The room hushed like an audience, waiting for the trapdoor to fall. Jason blinked. That's a misunderstanding. There are routine verifications, the journalist interrupted, so the signature of Walter Shaw is invalid. Jason hesitated. A rustle came from the aisle. A man in a gray suit stepped onto the stage. The crowd turned. His presence wasn't announced, but it needed no introduction. The man handed a red envelope to the moderator. This document, he said, is notarized by the original signatory of the estate, Mr. Walter Shaw. Jason's jaw tightened. And then I stepped through the side door. No fanfare, no vengeance in my stride, just a quiet dignity earned from years of rebuilding what others tore apart. I didn't speak until I stood beside the microphone. I'm not here to take back what was mine, I said, my voice carrying through the glassy silence. I'm here to correct what should never have been taken in the first place. This house, my home, was built by hand, brick by brick, for a family that valued trust. That trust was broken. I'm merely holding the pieces again. Cameras clicked wildly. Jason opened his mouth, but no words came. Madeline, standing off stage, took one look at him, then turned and exited through the side hallway. A few journalists murmured. One shouted, "Mr. Shaw Sr., will you be pressing charges?" I didn't answer. The point had already been made. The press conference disbanded in waves, confused, crackling energy mixed with the realization that they just witnessed the moment the mask fell. Near the back of the hall, Thomas York approached me. His face, always composed, now held something bordering on respect. "They picked the wrong person to betray," he said. "You don't build integrity overnight, but when you lose it," he glanced toward the stage, "you lose everything." Outside, the air felt colder but lighter. By 9:00 p.m., I returned to my property. The gate was locked, electronically. A new system, Jason's final attempt at control. I stood before the camera pole, letting its infrared eye scan me. I knew he was watching, and then I smiled. One more trick before the year ends. Inheritance is passed. Legacy is earned and reclaimed. January the 2nd. The courtroom was quiet, not with absence, but with weight. Polished wood, a judge's gavel, and years of memory lined the walls. I took my seat on the plaintiff's side. Across from me, Jason adjusted his tie twice in 30 seconds. Madeline wasn't with him. Judge Rhodes entered, stern, unreadable. The kind of man who didn't care for family drama, only facts. Attorney Henry stood first. "Your Honor," he began, "we submit a full record of home improvement receipts dating back 16 years. Each payment made from Mr. Walter Shaw's personal accounts without reimbursement. In addition, we include email correspondence between Mr. Jason Shaw and Darlins & Co., where false ownership claims were used to inflate the property's value as loan collateral." Judge Rhodes glanced at Jason. "Do you contest these records?" Jason rose. His voice trembled under forced confidence. "Those emails were taken out of context. I acted with the understanding that you acted." Rhodes cut in, "under a temporary power of attorney granted while your father was recovering from surgery. A window of vulnerability, not consent." The next witness was read aloud, Sophie. Her signed statement confirmed that Jason had pushed her to submit notarized claims aligning with his false filings. She declined to appear in person, but her words were heavy enough. Henry didn't smile. Neither did I. "The truth doesn't require celebration." After reviewing the documents, Rhodes leaned forward. "Mr. Jason Shaw," he said, "you have misrepresented ownership of a personal asset, misused legal authority, and compromised financial ethics. The court rules the house in question as solely owned by the plaintiff, Mr. Walter Shaw. All mortgage filings under your name are nullified." The gavel fell once. The sound wasn't thunderous, but to me it was the calm before clarity. By late afternoon, I stood at the gates of my home. This time they opened. Inside, the rooms were quiet. Empty, not in furniture, but in spirit. I walked the hallway, slowly pausing at each picture frame. One still held a family portrait, Jason, Madeline, and me, years ago. I removed it gently and placed it in a drawer. In its place, I hung a single sheet, the original architectural sketch I made of this house, drawn in graphite the year after my wife passed. Lines imperfect, but mine. The sun dipped as snow began to fall outside. I brewed a cup of tea the same way I did decades ago, mint leaves and a slice of ginger. Then I sat on the front porch watching snow settle on the railing. No music, no visitors. Just silence and the deep breath of resolution. I don't need them to call me family, I thought, as long as I don't forget who I am. An hour later, I checked the mailbox. Among unpaid advertisements was a single postcard handwritten in delicate ink. I'm sorry. You didn't deserve this. Madeline. I folded the card not in anger, just quietly. It slipped into a drawer in my study, filed behind a tab marked Lessons Paid in Full. The snow that fell that morning wasn't a celebration. It was just quiet, like the peace that comes after a storm has said its last word. I didn't reclaim a house. I reclaimed the right to be the man I've always been, builder, father, survivor of betrayal. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but it resonates powerfully once it's heard. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: you can lose everything and still walk away with your name if you fight smart and stand tall.